Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're doing something a little different. We're basically tearing up the rulebook on revolutions. When we look at major political upheaval, our first instinct is almost always to tear down the old to make way for the new, right? But the source material we're looking at today proposes a pretty radical shift in how we think about this. It argues that true, lasting societal change absolutely doesn't come from a wrecking ball. Instead, it comes from a very deliberate blueprint. So let's dive straight into this really counterintuitive quote right here. "O youth of revolutions, there is no demolition in sociology." Now, think back to recent massive societal upheavals. The dominant slogans were always, demolishing the regime, destroying the system, or dismantling the infrastructure. And hey, that's the totally natural passion of young activists who just want to tear down corrupt, flawed systems. But the author points out a huge fundamental flaw in this exact kind of thinking. Because in the actual science of sociology, pure demolition simply does not work. Because think about it, you literally can't just demolish the structures and institutions of a society and expect everything to just be fine. When institutions are destroyed overnight, society is left without any framework at all. Daily life literally halts and chaos just completely takes over. On the flip side, gradual societal building is what actually aligns with natural cosmic laws. Growth takes time. It's organic. You simply cannot bypass the natural laws of the universe by trying to force a sudden, destructive reset button on society. To really put this into perspective, the text gives us a pretty striking time frame. 60 years. Yeah, 60 years. An entire generation cannot just be flipped upside down in a year or two. True, deep-rooted societal change requires a very, very long breath. It's this massive project that requires slowly melting away those old entrenched systems over decades, rather than just trying to blow them all up overnight. Which kind of brings us to a massive crossroads, right? If sudden demolition of a corrupt system actively goes against the laws of sociology, and if tearing down institutions just leads to the total collapse of daily life, then what is the actual path forward? How do we replace a deeply flawed system without accidentally destroying the entire society right along with it? Well, the crucial point is that the author outlines two foundational duties. This is the proven strategy for replacing entrenched oppressive systems, which the text metaphorically refers to as pharaohs. Step one is entirely internal, building the human being and actively ignoring the oppressor. Step two is external, continuing relentless, peaceful pressure. And together, these two steps create this incredible mechanism for change that doesn't rely on a wrecking ball at all. All right, duty one, building humans and ignoring pharaohs. So, what does building humans actually look like? It means actively shifting our focus away from just obsessing over the oppressor and instead looking inward at the people who actually make up the society. The source uses a really powerful analogy here. Society has to be built up human by human, exactly the same way a wall is built brick by brick. When individual people are strengthened, educated, and connected, they begin to hold each other up. And this builds what the text calls the internal immunity of the society. When a society is that tightly knit and structurally sound from the inside, it closes the gaps. It leaves absolutely no room for the scorpions and snakes to slip through. And that takes us to duty two, continuous, peaceful pressure. Now, building that human capacity internally absolutely does not mean just sitting back passively. No way. It requires continuous, peaceful pressure. We're talking about things like civil disobedience, highly organized, silent gatherings, and just a continuous, unending stream of demands. This relentless, nonviolent pressure achieves two massive things. First, it keeps the entrenched system constantly off balance and fearful. And simultaneously, it wakes up the masses. It forces the general public to really start thinking, which completely accelerates that internal building process we were just talking about. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. When a ruler faces this kind of highly organized, peaceful pressure, they almost always panic, right? They resort to terror, oppression, violence. But if the society remains totally calm and just absorbs that violent agitation with quiet, steady, organized pressure, it completely exposes the true nature of the ruler to everyone watching. It strips away their legitimacy, and it drives the public to awaken and demand the truth so much faster. Now, the author doesn't just leave this as pure theory. They bring in some solid historical proof to back it all up. The first major example is the famous historical narrative of the Boy and the King, also known as Ashab al-Ukhdud. Let's look at how this ancient story maps perfectly onto the sociological blueprint we've been breaking down. In this historical account, this young boy had actually built up a massive following. The oppressive king literally tried to kill him multiple times but failed. Now, with that kind of backing, he could have, well, actually no, he deliberately chose not to use his massive following to violently pull the rug out from under the king. Instead of opting for a sudden chaotic overthrow, the boy focused entirely on spreading his principles and beliefs to the masses. He prioritized building the human mind over demolishing the throne. This whole concept builds even further when we look at another really profound example from the source, the Prophet Muhammad's time in Mecca. This specific period is basically presented as the ultimate case study in strategic patience and the deliberate refusal to use premature demolition to try and force societal change. During these early years, the persecution was intense for sure, but the Prophet was focused entirely on building human cadres, meaning carefully training and educating individuals. In fact, when many of the companions specifically asked for permission to use swords to overthrow the oppressive Meccan system, the Prophet strategically refused. Why? Because the societal base simply wasn't ready yet. The human infrastructure hadn't been fully built. The text points to a specific Quranic quote here. "Have you not seen those who were told, 'Restrain your hands and establish prayer'?" The author makes sure to emphasize that this was absolutely not a sign of surrender or weakness. Not at all. It was a highly calculated, long-term strategic command. It was an explicit instruction to focus inward, on internal building and discipline, rather than engaging in a premature, highly destructive fight that the young society just couldn't survive yet. All of this intense focus on human discipline culminated years later in a really critical historical moment, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Now, this treaty tested the emotional and diplomatic restraint of this newly built society to its absolute limits. One of the absolute hardest conditions of this treaty was that the Muslims had to return any person from Mecca who came to them seeking refuge. I mean, imagine the emotional toll of that, sending a fellow believer back to an oppressive system. It was agonizing for the companions, yet they exhibited extreme self-control, and they honored the treaty. This demonstrated the immense, undeniable power of a fully built, disciplined human cadre that is capable of looking at the long-term strategy, rather than giving into short-term emotional reactions. Now, what's really fascinating about this moment in history is actually what didn't happen. Because if those early Muslims had given into their immediate emotional reactions, if their belief system was even slightly unstable, they absolutely would have rebelled against the treaty. And that emotional chaos would have sparked a totally disastrous counter-revolution, likely destroying them from the inside out. But instead, their strategic restraint is what ultimately led to an enduring historical victory. So, wrapping this up, the power of gradual change. Enduring societal change isn't loud, it's not sudden, and it's definitely not explosive. It relies entirely on constructing a robust human infrastructure, rather than just cheering for catastrophic destruction. Based on all the sociological rules and historical precedents we've unpacked today, the path is pretty clear. The quick fix of tearing things down, it's a mirage. It only leads to chaos. Real change takes decades of patient, persistent human development and organized, peaceful pressure. So looking forward, I leave you with this. Will you choose the illusion of demolition, or will you commit to the enduring legacy of building? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep building, and I'll see you next time.